When I talk to kids or whatever about sneakers, invariably someone's wearing a pair of Converse high tops.
Yeah.
The Converse All-Star came out in 1917. Mm-hmm. And it's incredible to me that, can you imagine designing something in 1917 and kids still thinking it's cool?
Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Semmelhack. I'm the director and senior curator of the Bata Museum here in Toronto, Canada. And currently we are in artifact storage.
My name is Abby Albino. I am the co-founder of Makeway, which is North America's first sneaker boutique for women and completely run and funded by women. My co-founder, Shelby Weaver, and I, we really recognize a void in the sneaker industry as sneaker lovers through and through, and people who have worked in basketball and kind of been around the sneaker game for a really long time. We found it was difficult and challenging as Canadian women to access sneakers that we wanted to purchase.
Women were kind of kept out of sneaker consumption in a meaningful way for decades and decades and decades.
Once we kind of looked more deeply into that, we recognized that the reason there was a lack of access was because there was lack of infrastructure in the sneaker game for women.
Even as nascent sneaker culture is emerging out of New York City in the 1970s, it becomes sort of globalized in the 80s. Footwear is linked to constructions of social identity. It's linked to economics. It's linked to environment and resource availability. And sneaker manufacturers never make the most desirable sneakers in women's sizes. It's a really interesting form of footwear to consider constructions of gender. It starts out as a signifier more of status than gender. And so the sneakers I have pulled will allow us to sort of explore these stories and across from the origin of the sneaker to where we are today. And truly, it ends on a hopeful note because things are really changing in very interesting ways.
I think footwear and history and how society functions is so incredibly intertwined, from innovation to where the world is going from a societal standpoint.
I pulled some sneakers that sort of talk about the history of women in relation to sneakers. And the first pair I have is from the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century. This is a pair of women's tennis shoes. One of the things that people think about early sneakers is that they think, they were probably just cheap canvas and rubber soles. This was an expensive material. In fact, to have a pair of rubber overshoes cost 5 times the cost of a pair of leather shoes. So early tennis shoes were using the coolest new material, but they were expensive. And they were used to play the newly revived game of lawn tennis. All of these nouveau riche wanted to be able to show that they had arrived. Tennis was an athletic activity that men and women did together. We say love in tennis, but tennis actually took on these concepts of coupling, of meeting the right man, showing up with the well-turned out foot, and looking great while you played the sport. So these ideas of athleticism and femininity were tied to traditional concepts of being attractive, but there were also ideas that women could participate, particularly white upper-class women, could participate in active sports.
I just think that right now it's such a funny time to look back and see that first women's tennis shoe and think about all the things that went into it and why it became so popular at the time was because of the era it was in, and then because of the products and resources they had available to them. So super interesting now that we're so many years later and seeing how much footwear and sneakers, or just footwear in general, really inform who a person is and what the world is doing at the time.
So once tennis is created, tennis shoes are created, other things begin to arise. Industrialization gives rise to rich industrialists, but it also brings many, many immigrants to North America looking for jobs. And so sports is considered to be something that all people of all classes can be encouraged to do. This is why the YMCA is created. And one of the most famous games in the history of sneaker culture is invented for the YMCA as part of this movement, which was basketball. It became a sport that took over women's colleges. Women were encouraged to play the sport because the way Naismith made the sport was to dissipate passion. So at the turn of the 20th century, there's this incredible moment where you could exercise as an expression of status. You could exercise as a form of good, solid female health. When World War I happens, Hollywood is emerging, and you have a huge division around the whole world. Countries begin to focus on the physical fitness of men. Women, on the other hand, are supposed to exercise to look good. So here, the woman's still allowed to play tennis. It's still an upper class kind of pursuit, but she has to now do it wearing a high heel to sort of show that I'm not doing this just so that I can be active. I'm doing this as an expression of privilege. This reminds me of something that happened pretty recently in sneakers for women, which was the wedge-heeled sneaker, which was sort of allowing women to be sort of near sneaker culture, but we had to somehow still have this heel reference that didn't fully allow us in.
Cheryl Swoops obviously was the first female to have her own basketball shoe, and that was mid-90s. When you look back at women and their influence on sneaker culture, it's pretty recent that we've had our say. I remember, the Reebok aerobic shoe was like the thing that all women had, and that really like sparked a whole movement of women in sneakers back in the 80s or maybe late 70s.
Regardless of whether or not individual women wanted to have sneakers, most companies actively kept women out of sneaker culture by not making shoes in their sizes. So if women start to become the dominant force, then it's something men don't want a part of anymore. And so I think sneaker manufacturers were like, if we do this gatekeeping, we'll preserve these associations of masculinity, it's gonna drive this obsession. But something really interesting happened when Rihanna released the PUMA Creepers. So she's asked to do a collaboration with PUMA, and she makes the PUMA Creeper very feminine. This came out only in women's sizes. And the next thing you knew, men were trying to cram their feet into every size 10 sold out instantly, and the shoes had to be re-released in men's sizes. That might seem like a small moment, but the fact that men were willing to wear a shoe related to a female celebrity.
Really interesting to see the gender neutrality of sneakers start to be more prevalent.
So I think by looking at just these three historic examples, I think we can chart sort of these shifts in ideas around femininity, ideas around women's sneaker use. I think the other thing too that has opened up for women within the sneaker space is that I think we're still very slow to celebrate excellent female athletes, but female musicians are recognized a little bit more. When Run DMC signed with Adidas in 1986, the next musician that signed with Adidas was Missy Elliott, but decades later. But it's interesting to me that they chose Missy Elliott, right? And her sneaker collecting is so incredible. More recently, Ewing's has done the High 33 in honor of Salt and Peppa. And so there is sort of this desire to make sure that female musicians are either recognized or given opportunities, such as Rihanna that you see here.
Now, when you think about how many women collaborators there are designing for massive sneaker companies like Melody Asani, who I'm wearing today, or we have Yoon Ambush, Rihanna, we have Missy Elliott, we have Danielle Guzio with Reebok. There's just so many more collaborators, and that really helps inform where sneaker culture is going, because women are so interested in sneakers, and their ability to purchase sneakers is, I think, an opportunity for the sneaker industry to really look at okay, we need to provide these women something back, because clearly they're willing to invest and they're willing to support this industry. I think that with footwear and sports, it's super interesting to see how much sport really informs just every day. You could really express who you are through your footwear. We always talk about when you build an outfit, it's usually from the feet up, and that was for a long time kind of how fashion and specifically sneakers worked. I think about basketball because that's kind of my world, and I grew up playing basketball, and that's what made me fall in love with sneakers to begin with. I needed that pair of Air Zoom Flights 96s, those were my shoe, and I had to have them because Penny Hardaway wore them 30 years later, and I'm still the same 10-year-old kid who just needs that pair of shoes. So it's super interesting to see how much that has affected me.
I think that there is some very interesting shifts. For example, the WNBA rising in incredible importance.
You're going to see a lot more player edition shoes and specifically lines dedicated to women. Sabrina has her pair and they killed last year, and they're a beautiful shoe while also being super functional. Hopefully you'll see a lot more women's sneakers out in the marketplace.
And so I think when men and women are as eager to wear a female sports hero as they are to wear a male sports hero, I think then we will 100% have really started to transform this issue.